was a UX designer, I started in engineering, and then during the pandemic, I transitioned into UX because I tried to get into full stack development, but my background was in my background was in software development, so I just needed to learn the front end essentially. But while I was learning the front end, I started to pick up some UX design skills, and then I found out that it was a lot more enjoyable than what I was currently doing. So that's how I made the transition in the beginning.
Okay.
And then how I transitioned into Web3 is basically at, I would say, near the end of the pandemic, maybe like late 2021, when I started noticing that there was a very large trend growing, especially around, cryptocurrencies, right? You
Right.
like at the end of 2021, you saw on the news a lot, like Bitcoin price was reaching like new heights every week, and Ethereum as well, right? And all these new like other coins like Dogecoin, right? It was
Yeah.
very prominent in the news quite recently. So yeah, that's when I started to realize that this might be something revolutionary. So I was actually very skeptical at first because a lot of new technologies usually just like fizzle out, right? It
Right.
doesn't really mature or it doesn't really grow into anything. But as I started doing a bit more research, it started making a lot more sense, like the Web3 in general. So that's kind of how I started getting into it and how I started trying to bring a bit more um, information around it because there's like a kind of a stigma around it that it's unstable and it's not going to go far, right? Like a lot of people are calling NFTs are like scams, and a lot
Right.
of people are, yeah, you know what I mean, right? There's a very negative stigma around it right now.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of my journey about how I got to Web3.
Right. So for the sake of our audience, can you explain what is Web 3.0 and what is that is different from Web 2.0 or Web 1.0?
Yeah, sure. So I guess we can just start at the beginning. Web 1.0 is the beginning of the internet, where things were created by a small group of individuals, and then it was basically just being able to read information on the internet. So, for example, like the news or some blogs that only some people were capable of doing, right? And then Web 2 is the internet where we are now, right? Like social media where everyone can control their own posts, but everything is hosted by social media conglomerates or large companies like Reddit,
Right.
for example, right? Or like Facebook. You can write posts, like even the blog that you found my article on was Medium.
Right.
um, I wrote the article, but it's being hosted by Medium, right? So all of the information is basically controlled by these large corporations. And then that's the thing where Web3 comes into play is all the information that you find is going to be controlled by the individuals themselves. So yeah, that's essentially how it progresses from Web 1.0 to 2.0 to Web 3.0, which is basically just transfer and ownership of information.
So you mean that ownership is the biggest factor which is different from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0, where we'll
Yes.
own something, like some kind of data will be owned. And those data will need to be stored at some point at some place. And that is called wallets, and which is again a term used in Web 3.0. MetaMask is one of the software which I was researching on, and you can store all your NFTs. But I want to know, like, what kind of data can be stored in a wallet? Will it be just cryptos or NFTs, or like is there any other form of data that can be stored?
Yeah, sure. So Um, a lot of things can be stored in a wallet. Like you said, the most common things are, of course, like currency, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, which are used to purchase things. But it doesn't just end there. You can also store things like, well, actually, most recently, I went to this developer conference, a product designer conference hosted by ADP List. And then
Oh,
at the very end of their session, all the people who attended were provided with free NFTs that you can link to your MetaMask wallet
oh,
just to show that you attended to the conference, right? So the NFTs themselves are not always necessarily uh, like monetary, like monetarily based. Like they don't have to be bought and sold like fine art, right? Like they're not. necessarily just stores of money. They can even just be used to represent something that occurred. So in the future, a lot of companies are considering the use of NFTs for concert tickets. Like let's say you go to like this, like Coachella, for example, right? If you go to Coachella, if you purchase a ticket, then they give you an NFT at the end to show that you attended Coachella, right? It can be part of like an exclusive group of people, right? It's kind of like a society, right? Like you know how people in um, have you heard of Board 8 Yacht Club? Like those
Yeah,
NFTs. Yeah, exactly. So it's something like that, right? Where people purchase an NFT to be part of like this exclusive
okay,
group of people, and
correct.
then that's like representing something that you've been a part of, right? So
So as a UX designer, like when we are used to designing for Web 2.0, like all the application, web application, but when it comes to Web 3.0, what are the things that are going to change? Like backend, I know it's changing. Like we have blockchain technology and everything coming, but on the front end, from the user point of view, what are the things that's going to change and influence, and does that also change our design process, like what we use to design a particular experience? Does that also change with Web 3.0?
right. Web 3.0 has like a bit of a negative stigma right now, especially with it's like we're very reliant on the blockchain, especially like Ethereum, Bitcoin, like the price of these currencies is kind of unstable right now. And
Right.
additionally, there's a lot of negative stigma around NFTs because like the scams that you see around them are very prominent, especially on Twitter. So the first thing that we have to do as UX designers is to ensure that the public feels safe and secure about what is happening on the platform or like the interface that they're using, right? So, in order to do that, I think that the first thing that we have to do is to inform them, right? Because otherwise, they're still going to be scared, and the current infrastructure right now is not the best
Mhm.
because it's very difficult to understand. Like even me, as I was getting into Web3, I was having a hard time understanding, like MetaMask, understanding how to transfer money, how to link my MetaMask wallet, how to transfer like US dollars to, you know, Ethereum and how to transfer to a different wallet, right? There's so many things to understand. And I think it's this where it stems from, like this uncertainty is um, how much different this infrastructure is to the current currency system that we have, right? It's very simple. Like PayPal is very simple to use in comparison to like transferring through MetaMask. So I think ultimately we just have to understand that the user is very scared of what is unknown, and then as a result, we need to inform them, and then they feel more safe and secure, and then they're more obligated to use the new platform, right?
As a UX designer, we have been told that don't make the user think. Make it smooth, like make the experience as smooth as possible. Don't make him think a lot. And now when it comes to Web 3.0, we'll probably have to make them have, like we have to educate them, or we have to at every step, and which I've also heard that in smart contracts, those are like irreversible. So if you proceed and if you agree to the terms, you are like done. You cannot go back, right? And so purposely we have to make them think at particular steps. Like, when what's your take on that? Like,
Right. So I think it's inevitable for a new technology where they have to learn something. Uh, I don't think like it. I feel like that statement is a little bit dubious. Like you can't make the user think because obviously they still have to think at every step of the process, right?
right,
So especially since it's just such a new technology, um, we have to gradually incorporate it into our society. Like a lot of things that I read about the Web3, I found it to be metaphorically similar to, like the Apple, like the iPhone when it first came out, right? People were so they were not used to like the touchscreen and stuff, but
yeah,
the way Apple designed their iPhone was by they were basically they're basically basing it off of the weight of how things move. So when you swipe something, they based the speed at which you swipe something with the weight of how you push something in real life. So it's this metaphor that they use and this connection to reality where they were able to make the user not think so that the swiping motion was intuitive, right? Does that make sense so far?
Can you give another example, like to explain it?
Yeah, sure. So basically in Web3, since we're already informing them, I feel like there's a more elegant way of informing them rather than simply educating them, right? We don't want them to just watch videos, or we don't want them to
Okay.
like read articles and blogs, because that's not
Right.
the most efficient way, right? Like people's attention spans now, especially in today's society, have become so short that, like
Right.
watching videos or reading blogs is going to be very difficult to absorb information. So
Right.
a much faster way of doing things is just by simply using metaphors that currently exist, such as PayPal, right? People are very accustomed to using PayPal or Interact e-transfer. So if we find a way to simplify the transfer process while also showing them how the process works, then it'll be a lot easier. So I actually was working on this app for money transferring process, similar to PayPal, but it was in the Web3. It was using blockchain technology. So what we did was we basically compared multiple things like that existed right now. So one of them was PayPal, because that was obviously one of our competitors, right?
Right.
So what we did was we tried to understand what the users were already accustomed to. So in PayPal's process, it was very simple. They just had to choose who to send it to and how much money to send it to. It was just two values essentially, right?
Right.
But for this one, we also had to choose which wallet they were linking it to
Right.
and which wallet they were sending it to. So it was the addition of multiple other variables, which was the hard part, right? Because this is not exactly intuitive with
Mm.
PayPal, right? They didn't have these variables with PayPal. So it was the fact that we had to incorporate these two variables without making it too much more complicated, right?
Right.
So I think that's kind of where the idea is. If we want to, this is just one idea in the money transfer process, but if we want to incorporate the blockchain into the Internet of Things in society today, I feel like we need to start small and then just build our way up, right? Gradually inform them without making it too difficult, right? Without overwhelming them.
When you said about the money transfer app and the transactions, right? So I have seen like my friend doing transactions on the Ethereum blockchain, buying NFTs or those things. Then there are other things also, right? There are gas fees, there are other hash rate and other things also which are included, which are probably for an end user is may not be that required. Like for me, who is a layman who doesn't know anything about Web3 or these things, we don't know that. But that my friend was adamant that okay, I want to see my transaction happening on the Etherscan website. I want to see all the approvals getting and the or the block getting added to the blockchain. And I asked him like, why do you want to see this? Because if you see that website, it's all numbers. You don't even understand what. Even I asked him like, what is this? He may not answer that. But but then I found like an interesting observation that we have started trusting machine language more than the human language, like just to see that okay, it acknowledges him that okay, it the process is happening on the blockchain, and it's not just one, because it decentralized, right? There's nobody up there controlling anything, or I can call a customer support, oh why my transaction is not happening. But for him, that process, that numbers those are clicking, that is that acknowledgement for him. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I actually think that's interesting because this is also kind of similar on what we were talking about earlier, right? Like how we trust machines more than we trust humans. Like we trust the process more than we trust humans. So
Right.
it also helps. I feel like this is something else that I learned as I was working with Web3. It also helps humans understand Web3 more, or even things that are unknown more, if they can visualize the process. So, in that money transfer app that I was working on, it was important for them to see exactly where their money was being sent. So, let's say I'm trying to send money from Canada to Australia, then we can visualize the process by using simple, we use a bar, right? Like a bar that fills up over time. So,
Yeah.
we started like in Canada, like the first node, right? Your money
Mm.
is
Yeah.
leaving Canada, right? And then it's being sent to the GitHub, or it was being sent to the node in Australia, right?
Right.
And then it was being sent to the wallet of the recipient in Australia, and then it arrived to the recipient in Australia. So just by using a simple process like that, they can easily visualize and understand Web3 more, right?
Right. Right.
And it shouldn't take that long because Web3 is something that is on the blockchain and it occurs pretty quickly. So they can even visualize it live, right? So something like this helps them
Mm.
understand the process more, right? Without actually understanding the underlying concept, right?
So as a UX designer, what do you think like will be the top three blockchains which as because if I am a designer and I want to know what is my backend, what could be according to you could be, like Ethereum is like one of the famous, but is there any other, like I heard about Polkadot because it has interoperability between two blockchains as well.
Right.
Because two more, because application, that decentralized application could be built on many blockchains, but then as a user I am just one single person, I want everything at one place. So I thought Polkadot is has a lot of potential. So what's your opinion on that? Like, is there any other blockchain we as designers should have some kind of information about uh, to survive in this industry?
Right. So um, I feel like there are not. I know you asked for three specific coins,
Okay.
but I feel like you only need to know about. There are only two things you really need to know. So obviously, Bitcoin is popular, but it's not really necessary to learn. It's kind of, I would say, it's gaining prominence. I feel okay. Obviously, it's the most popular one now, but Ethereum is a lot more useful than Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because objectively it's a lot more secure and it is going to be a lot more useful in the future. Yeah, just from what we can foresee right now, right? So
Right.
Ethereum, I feel like is something you should really understand. And then the second one you should understand are something called stable coins, right? So there are a variety of stable coins in the market right now. There's not specifically one that you can learn, but I'll just give you an example. So there's a stable coin called USDC, and then
Okay.
a stable coin is a coin that follows a specific currency exactly how it is. So USDC follows the US dollar. So
Right.
if one US dollar is worth exactly one USD. So this makes transactions very simple because there are no conversion rates that you have to do. Like, Ethereum goes up and down. It's very like it's not very stable, right? And same with Bitcoin, right? But stable
Right.
coins are easy to follow because it just exactly follows the currency that you're using, right? So
Right.
by starting with these two, like Ethereum and any stablecoins, or even just the concept of stablecoins, then I feel like you can get pretty far with those two.
Right. Right. One more question. So today we spent a lot of time on Facebook, Instagram, and other applications which are controlled by some corporations. And tomorrow we think that it will be decentralized. So do you think the same companies will shift their models to decentralized, or will have different apps in social media or any other types of platforms out there? Because will they give away their power with on the data, kind of data they have, or we'll see some new apps coming up in this vertical?
Right. So this is actually something I've thought about for a very long time because obviously the companies right now, like these large conglomerates, they are not just going to die away quietly, right? Like they already understand the prominence of Web3 and they understand that it might be a threat to their current like hold on the market. So you can see companies like Microsoft and even Facebook, right? And Facebook even recently renamed itself to Meta, right, to take advantage of this industry, right?
Right.
So I feel like it's going to be less of a they're going to be less of a figure in the future, but I don't know. I can't really say for sure. It's just I just can't imagine a world without, Facebook, Microsoft, like Apple, right? It's just a bit impossible to imagine it without them.
Right.
However, they're obviously going to lose if the world transitions into Web3 if into a Web3 world,
Mm.
then they're going to obviously lose a lot of power, but it's very difficult. Like they already have a massive foothold in the industry that I really can't just imagine them like, leaving, right?
Yeah, that's true. Blockchains can be hacked, but how do you so that how do you build that trust among our users? Like whichever platform, because every the decentralized app we are going to use, probably it will be built on a Ethereum blockchain or some kind of smart contract. So how do you build that trust? Because people are going to deal with real assets there, which has real value in the ecosystem.
Right. So this is going to a little bit of a different topic. It's kind of more into regulation laws, right? Because
Okay.
um, the current system is very reliant on banks. That's basically what we are used to right now, right? And then eventually the blockchain is going to replace the banks, right? So the way banks gain trust over time is through government endorsement, right? Since the government trusts the banks, then we have to understand that the banks are to be trusted, right? I think it's something like this that is going to eventually develop. Web3 is, I feel like Web3 is never going to be completely decentralized because the government should still have some sort of regulation on it. Otherwise, the scams that we see nowadays are going to be rampant, in the
Right.
future, right? That's going to be a very frightening reality if what is occurring now is going to be even more prominent in the future. So yeah, government regulation should be should be a lot more obvious in the future, and I think that's where it also stems from. That should be one of the factors where the security around Web3 is going to grow, right?
Right.
I
Right.
think a lot of states in in the US are already using Web3, like blockchain technologies. I'm not sure which one. I think Miami is using Bitcoin right now as some sort of payment for some of their transactions. And I think that's a start, right? That's a good start. And I think this will gain a lot more prominence over time. And even, I'm not, I don't remember, but there's this South American country that relies completely on Bitcoin, even though
Yeah,
it
it's El
crashes.
Salvador, right? El
Yeah,
Salvador.
exactly. Yeah, El Salvador. So I think these two, it just shows that it's possible that these large entities can rely so heavily on blockchain technologies while still, remaining economically stable to some extent, right?
Right. Right. If everyone is going to own their own data, how we as designers will get users to research? Like, how are we going to pinpoint users, and we do our interviews, and if it is anonymous or the data is controlled by individuals?
Hmm.
So
Right.
that's, yeah.
Interesting question. Yeah. So, um, obviously, there's not going to be as much statistics about the users, but there should still be usage of cookies on the site, which is the primary use we use now to gather statistics, right? So cookies are still not going to disappear from Web3. They're still an essential part of websites, right? You know when you open a website and then there's like accept cookies, reject cookies. There's like these like pop-up boxes, right?
Right.
Even when you press reject cookies, there are still going to be cookies on the site that do some form of tracking because it's essential for the site to be run. And additional to this, there are also other ways to do research on users that don't necessarily have to rely on their data. So the way what we did for our project is we just used surveys and we relied on specific groups of people that we approached in order to do our research on. We didn't necessarily gather data from specific PayPal users or specific Veeam users. We just approached people and asked them if they had time for an interview. And then it can be as simple as approaching maybe 50 people, right? And then that can give you enough market research to at least have a basic idea of what your product or interface is capable of, right? So
Right.
yeah, it's not necessarily about data gathering. There are a lot of other ways to do it as well.
Right. Right. Great. Okay, so one last question to you is like, for any budding UX designer, what is your opinion or your message to them? Like, when if they are getting started with Web 3.0. So there was one of my friend who wants to get into Web 3.0 but has no idea how to get started with it. Like, do we go? Is there any YouTube channels or any kind of articles, or what are the terminologies or any kind of technology that needs to be learned by a designer to get into Web 3.0?
Right. So there's actually okay. I feel like to get started into any sort of technology, you just have to dive into the deep end and just really expose yourself to all the technologies.
Hmm.
Um, I th- I think I learned enough UX of Web3 in maybe 3 or 4 months. So just by throwing yourself in the deep end and really educating yourself about everything Web3, just surrounding yourself in it, then I think you can definitely do it in maybe even less time, because I was not just working on, Web3 project. I was also dividing my time with freelance work. So
Okay.
even 2 months, you should be capable of,
Right.
working on pretty basic projects. And again, like everything requires practice, right? Like you don't become a UX designer without actually designing something. So maybe you can collab with somebody or enter like some hackathons. There's a lot of hackathons nowadays, or like designathons, where Web3 projects are in prominence, right? Like a lot of companies are starting to acknowledge the presence of Web3. So just by joining one of these hackathons and attending a few of the keynote speakers that are hosting the hackathon, then you will definitely learn a lot. So I think that's my number one tip.